Okay, greetings, hello. It's Dr. Thomas Daffern here for your weekly broadcast for Sundays. I'm fasting today. I do this every Sunday, and we'll continue until Brexit is reversed. So why? Well, state of the world is getting worse and worse, isn't it? And we have the pandemic, we have, etc., all the bad news, we know that. Today is good news. Today is Pentecost, which is really the foundation date of the Christian church. And I'm going to start with a little bit about Pentecost, for those that aren't familiar with this. So it's 50 days after Passover, Pentecost meaning 50 in Greek, and it was a historical festival that took place within Judaism, and the early Christians, after the events of the Passion Week and the crucifixion and the resurrection, which some of them have witnessed, the community decided to meet together to celebrate this event. And I'll read from the text. This is the King James Bible version. And this is Acts 2. And when the day of Pentecost was fully come, they were all with one accord in one place. And suddenly there came a sound from heaven, as of a rushing mighty wind, and it filled all the house where they were sitting. And there appeared unto them cloven tongues like as of fire, and it sat upon each one of them. And they were all filled with the Holy Ghost, and began to speak with other tongues as the Spirit gave them utterance. It's translated differently in more recent biblical translations. In the Greek, the original, and it's thought that Luke, who wrote Acts, probably wrote the original in Greek. He was a Hellenistic Jew from Antioch, a doctor, a physician, a learned man, and Greek was the language of the intelligentsia at the time of Christ, certainly in the Eastern Empire, but even in the the Western Empire as well. So tongues is glossai, as in all the words in English and medicine that come from this root, glossa. As a fire, osi pyros. Pyros as in pyramid and pyrotechnics and so on. It's the Greek word for fire. So the Holy Spirit then mentioned is holy is agion or agiu, and it's an adjective, and pneumatos is spirit, pneuma. Pneuma. It's a beautiful word in Greek, and in my Kabbalah runes I've gone into why pneuma means spirit. It's the blowing of breath through the P, which is there in prana, and it's there in slightly, B and P are interchangeable in the Kabbalah runes to some extent, and it's then brahma. Pa and ba often have this spirit sound, and the word spirit in Latin, spiritus, again has the p sound. What is p? Well, it's simply a pushing out of a tiny little breath of air. P. And if you're playing with a baby or something, you often go p, p, p. It's like one of the quietest sounds you can make. P. And that's what it is. It's simple. Breath, spirit. And that's what these people, and suddenly it took form as tongues of fire. I mean, these people are now clairvoyant. They've just lost their teacher. And then he's come back to them, and they're having a highly intensive spiritual inner searching. And this would be what's called the Kundalini arising to enlightenment. This is the symbol of when the Kundalini rises through the chakras up to the crown chakra, Sahasrara, and they're seeing the enlightened aureole or nimbus on each other. It's the, my God, Peter, you're shining. What, so are you, Thomas? My God, there's Mary Magdalene. Look, she's like a light bulb. God, there's Andrew. Look at him. He's like he's on fire. You know, you can imagine the disciples all like, what? What's going on? And then suddenly remembering this is what Jesus had promised. He would send them this spirit from, you know, the afterlife, the heaven world, where he's now gone. And he will be able to then send down these miraculous things. So I think we can I think this was a historical event, Pentecost. It's not something made up. It's not a fiction. I know there are some skeptics that say the whole Jesus story is made up. There was no Jesus. It's all a fabrication by the Piso aristocracy who were using it for political ends. You know, you're always going to get those kind of guys. They'll say there was never a Thomas Daffern, you know, in about 60 years. I didn't exist. That's why I'm recording these weekly things. Then there's proof, right? No. And I think this event was historical because, like, nobody would make this up. It's outside the normal Roman kind of worldview, apart from some very esoteric sects like the Orphic sect, which had permeated Hellenistic intellectual circles and also Roman to some extent. The Orphics would have understood exactly what's going on here. So would the Dionysians, because the Orphics and the Dionysians were like the same thing, just heads and tails of the same coin. And the Mithraic traditions would have understood as well. This is an initiate who's achieved the highest level of enlightenment, and his crown chakras lit up. The Jewish Kabbalists would have understood this because this is what happens when Malkut, the energies of Malkut, the earth, ascend up the Sephirotic tree of life up to Keter, the crown, and become, fully functional. All the Sephiroth are working together in harmony, and Keter is, alive. You're crowned with that aureole. Now that's what happened to these disciples, and they were, some of them were intellectual. There were the Gnostics like Thomas, Mary Magdalene. Some of them were, and St. John, were able to understand what was going on, I think, and had receipt of Jesus' closest, innermost teachings. Others, like Peter, they thought more in picture language, and that's fine too. It takes all sorts to plant a deep teaching, and Peter was very good at doing what he did, but he didn't understand the finer points of the Gnostic philosophical meaning of all this. Matthew, I think, did a bit more. Matthew was an intelligent and highly, intellectual sage, and so he's there shining away as well. It must have been amazing. And what I find very interesting with the Pentecost story is that it gives them this miraculous power to speak in all languages. Well, what does that mean? Do we take that literally, that suddenly they're all talking German and Japanese and Russian? Or is it my interpretation, which is they've gone to a place in their souls and in the spirit, which is higher than the place where language comes from. So they can read into people's hearts. They can speak the language of the universal soul, which precedes Arabic or Phoenician or Greek or Latin or whatever, or Celtic. And there would have been some Galatians, Celts, in Jerusalem, possibly in the inner circle. We know that Herod the Great's bodyguard were Galatians, who were Celts, right? And St. Paul later preached to them. St. Paul wasn't here on this occasion, which is interesting. This is being written down by Luke, who was a disciple and friend of Paul. But Luke had interviewed some of the people that were there. And Paul certainly, accepted this also as an accurate account. What wouldn't we give to go back and interview them all, eh? I think that maybe in about 1,000 years from now we'll have that retrocognitive ability to reconstruct historical events. I've written a novel about that, what history will be like, 10,000 years from now as a discipline. But for now, we just have to go with the text and what archaeology can say. And I think it was taking these people, not only, you know, the light bulb effect, but it was taking them to a place of deep wisdom where they could see into the spiritual matrix underlying normal material reality. And that takes them to a place of universalism. And that's the whole point of Christianity. You know, if Christ wasn't teaching from that place, and he was teaching from some sort of lesser fanatical, tribal, look at me, I'm the Messiah kind of place, then he wasn't the Messiah of the world. He might have been a little Jewish tribal leader or some, you know, sect of weird Gnostic Kabbalists who were play acting at being Dionysus or whatever, but that wasn't universal wisdom transmission. To me, Pentecost is important because it's the guarantee that, no, this is a universal wisdom transmission from Spirit, from God, from the Absolute. And then it goes on, so it says, you know, the crowd don't understand, what are they all doing? And then St. Peter stands up, and this is where he is quite useful. He was quite a public speaker. And he says, look, it's, you know, no, they're not drunk. It's only 9 in the morning. And he quotes them from the prophecies of Joel, who was one of the great, you know, universal prophets of the Jewish tradition, or the Israel tradition. In the last days, God says, I will pour out my Spirit on all people. Your sons and daughters will prophesy. Your young men will see visions, and your old men will dream dreams. Even on my servants, both men and women, I will pour out my Spirit in those days, and they will prophesy. And I will show wonders in the heaven above, and signs on the earth below. It's, you know, it's a very beautiful passage. Joel is you know, a great prophet, and he comes right at the end of the Old Testament, as it's called. And what Peter's saying there, and what the Christians were saying, is, look, we are recipients of that prophecy. What we've been waiting for all this time, this universalism, when the spirit of prophecy will be poured out upon all people, men and women, slave and free, you know. That's come true now, and that's what Pentecost stands for. And that's what Christianity stands for at its best. It means that I can go into a church in Italy, in France, in Scotland, in Africa, in Kenya, in Tehran, where there are many churches. In India, I've been to many churches there, particularly in the south, where St. Thomas took the Gospels. In China, where there are many churches. Anywhere. Philippines, I've been in the cathedral in Manila. Greece, I've been to many churches in Greece. You know, it's dotted with incredible churches. My favourite is the little one outside Knossos in Crete, called Hagia Sophia. Holy wisdom. No, sorry. Hagia Irene. It's named after peace, Saint Irene, Greek word for peace. And it's a tiny little church up towards the mountains in the direction of the cave where Zeus was born, according to Greek, you know, tradition. And to me, it's the most sacred church in Greece that I've yet found. And it's got beautiful paintings of the Virgin Mary wearing a blue velvet dress, you know, surrounded by a crown of stars. So yes, churches all over the world. I can go into any of them, and I can feel at home. I can feel like this is the working of Spirit. This is the message of universal peace and healing and truth which Christ stood for, and it poured out on this day, Pentecost, on the disciples. And it says in the text there were about 120 people gathered together at that meeting, and you know, from there this miracle spread. But if it doesn't come with that universality, with that sort of quintessential moderation, which is at the core of universal sapiential wisdom, if it teaches fanaticism or egotism of any kind, in my opinion, it's not the authentic thing. It's not the actual Church of Christ. It's something else. It's a sort of man-made cult of, you know, egotism. And unfortunately, in history, there have been times when the various churches, Protestant, Catholic, Orthodox, have been captured by those forces. But on the whole, the innermost teachings, if you look at, the history of the saints, which I've made a study of, hagiography it's called, the study of the sacred, saints of humanity, they all are saying the same thing. They're saying what I'm saying about universality is the hallmark of enlightenment and wisdom. You don't get to have your Keta crown chakra open up and beaming away like lights, firing up, and still stay a mean-minded, ignorant, hate-filled kind of, person. No, you've got to drop all that stuff for it to work. That's the miracle of, signs that Joel talks about. So I'm just going to say there that that's a very beautiful thing. Now, who am I to say all this? Okay, so because today's Pentecost, I'm dressed in white, which is unusual. I don't normally bother, but traditionally one dresses in white today, and it was the day on which people were baptized. I was baptized into the church when I was a student at the University of London, King's College Chapel. I think it was 1986 or 1987. I've got the little thing that you're given by the bishop, and I did it as a sort of sign of commitment to the teachings of Christ, to that universal teaching. And so I regard myself as a universalist Christian, Catholic in that deeper sense of someone that's universal. And that's what the word Catholic means. It means someone who is universally attuned to the wisdom of God in all manifestations and forms. So I identify with people like Karl Rahner, Thomas Merton, as an endless number of intellectuals who've articulated this position, and within all the churches, not just the Roman Catholic Church. No, there's the Anglican Church is also a Catholic church, and so is the Orthodox Church. So, okay, but beyond and before that, I have other links to Christianity. I've studied the Gnostic tradition, I've been a Quaker attender, and I've gone very, very deeply into what this spiritual thing is, what was Pentecost. The little bit of teaching I'm able to share with you in these lectures is based on years of deep study. I've also done commentaries on the Gospels, the four Orthodox Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke and John, but also the Gnostic Gospels of Mary Magdalene and St. Thomas. And I've gone into great detail in those commentaries, which I can't do in just a brief little thing here. And before that, there's also something else I want to say. Bear with me. Right, okay, so today also I want to share that, you see, why am I interested in all this? Okay, so back in about the year 2000 or 1999, I was invited to Oklahoma to a spiritual retreat centre, like a Findhorn. And by the way, it's so tragic that the Universal Hall at Findhorn has burned to the ground. And it's sort of symbolic of what I'm saying. That was the Universal Hall. And that is in danger of being lost in Brexit Britain, that universality which is at the heart of our European Union of nations all coming together in peace. Britain's rejection of that by an elite that have hijacked power illegally and immorally through lies and through manipulation. So what, our universality is in danger, and hence the Universal Hall at Findhorn catches fire. Some nutter probably was the agent of it, but it's a thought wave which is anti-universal that's swept over Britain like a virus. Okay, so I stand against all that. I'm with the Universal Hall, right, where I've taught up at Findhorn. I've given lectures up there. I love the place. I've done meditation there with Eileen Caddy and others. So, what I want to share is that I've been working on making a list of all my past videos of the year 2018, 2019 and 2020. I've been writing 50 books, recording these talks and doing endless, correspondence with people all around the world and many other things. And so every few years I put a volume of autobiography together and I put it all into place. So what's interesting is in 2019, I think it was, I gave a talk about a past life regression that I had. I know it was, 2019 in August it was. And I gave a talk to camera, like I'm doing now, on August the 11th. Now, therefore, I'm not going to repeat what, I shared then. I'm going to ask you if you're interested. But in that talk, I'll just say very, very briefly, it was revealed in the past life experience I had in 1999 that I'd actually been one of the teachers of Jesus Christ, the rabbi from Galilee. And I don't say that with any boasting or, it's a very, it puts one in a certain responsible position because of the impact that guy's had on history. And the past life regression that I had was very, very believable. Obviously, there's no cast iron proof. I can't sit here saying, yes, absolutely, I was a teacher of Christ. I can say the evidence is fairly persuasive that that was probably the case. But I would say, okay, but if you disprove it to me, that's fine. I only put this forward as a rational hypothesis based on that past life regression, but also lots of other signs, let's say, ayat in Arabic. And that's why I'm so interested in Christ's story, and why I think this day of Pentecost, that's why I think that universality is so important. And so listen to the interview. It was on August the 11th in 2019. It's still on my YouTube channel. And then if you've got any questions, feel free to email me. I'd be happy to do another interview about it. I think all I would say is that I was a teacher in ancient Egypt in one of the temple schools. And we had an incredibly interesting, involved and profound wisdom, tradition. And Christ was initiated into that. Now, I'm not the first person to say that. Many people have surmised that. And that was partly responsible for the depth, the breadth, and the universality of his teachings. Okay, I'm not going to go on more about that now. Listen to the interview. Right, I want to move on and talk about something else, which is still actually the same, but coming from a different angle. Because some of my dear friends and colleagues know that as well as a Christian and a Druid, I'm also a Sufi, and I'm very interested in Islamic spiritual teachings. And given this recent, outbreak of fighting between Gaza, Israel, the sort of riots going on in the streets of many cities in Israel. I mean, it's absolutely catastrophic. And the attack on Al-Aqsa Mosque by Israeli Defense Forces, which seemed to trigger the whole thing. The continuing refusal by Israel to grant or concede anything to the Palestinians' cause in the way of a state. I watch these events with chagrin and a profound feeling of solidarity for both sides. I want Israel to flourish and Palestine, which is why I set up the Truth and Reconciliation Commission for the Middle East. When I visited there back in 2008, and I've been working on this ever since behind the scenes. But now the time has come that we have to really up the ante. I'm only a scholar and a philosopher. I'm a teacher. Just as I was in that life, so I am again. I'm not a politician, or I would certainly change a few things. So as a scholar and a philosopher, what I've done is write, my 50, 60 books, whatever. But I'm also doing commentaries on the great spiritual classics of humanity, because I'm trying to show people, as a teacher, that there is this universal wisdom tradition buried within them all. This is what Aldous Huxley said, it's what, Goclenius said, it's what Plato said, it's what Pythagoras said, it's what Orpheus said, it's what all the great spiritual teachers have said. And, as a basis for that, I'm using my periodic table of the world's religious and philosophical traditions on the wall behind me. And I argue as a teacher of religious studies and philosophy that unless you've mastered the contents of all 168 boxes, which are grouped according to different categories like, Chinese thought, Buddhist thought, Islamic, Christian, Jewish and so on. The Christian ones are all the blue ones. The Hindu ones are these deep yellow. The Islamic are these green ones. These are the humanist ones, things like, Marxism and so on. Then you've got the Chinese thought. It took me a long, long time to compile this, but this is the periodic table of the world's religious and philosophical traditions. And unless we as a planet learn all 168 and are cognizant of them, learn them in our schools and our universities, I believe that in every school in the world this should be taught. And unless you know and understand all 168, you are illiterate when it comes to ethics, philosophy and spirituality. So that's the basis. Now, the conflict going on in the Middle East is because the Jewish, Christian, and Islamic schools are not reading each other's scriptures. They're not sitting at each other's feet. They're not going to the great Sufis or the Kabbalists and saying, teach me. We've become a people of arrogance. We say our people are the best, and if you don't agree with that, we'll bomb you. I mean, this is a shocking Kali Yuga type of, crisis we're through. So what I'm saying, by looking at, for instance, the Quran, the great Islamic text, I've gone into this in absolute detail, using all my scholarly texts on Islamic studies, which I've worked on and taught for years. I'm an expert in Islamic thought and history. And so I'm drawing on all that to give my commentary on the Quran in detail. And I've been working on Surah 40, which is Surah 60 in the chronological sequence. And it's a beautiful surah. I mean, I'm not going to, I can't repeat the whole thing. Listen to my commentary, which is on my Global Green University website. I'm just going to quote you a couple of verses from this, Surah 40, to give you a flavour of what the Sufi or Islamic tradition is all about, if you're not familiar with it, And I do so on this day of Pentecost, deliberately, because to me, from that experience of Pentecost, that bursting forth of spirituality, ultimately it also gave birth to Islam. Muhammad was a recipient, somewhat later, of the same impulse or spirit of direct revelation from spirit that came to those apostles. That's why Muhammad is never drawn. He's just drawn as a burning fire. An aureole surrounds him in Islamic art. Because he was like a disciple who came late to the feast of Pentecost. And Muhammad never saw what he was doing as somehow replacing or supplanting what Christ had taught. He felt a very deep inner kinship with Jesus' teaching. And he always said, I'm just supplementing what was taught by this prophet, this Messiah, because he called Christ the Messiah. But he brought his own spin, he brought his own flavouring, and what I've argued in my book on prophetic intelligence, in the religious maths book, is that prophetic intelligence, say it's Joel or Moses or Muhammad or Jesus, is receiving a ray of divine inspiration. It's the same with Druids. We do the same. We call it Arwen. You receive the Arwen, the divine inspiration. And if you're, depending on your purity of consciousness and your state of evolution, you will then share it back direct as it came to you. But all of us have cultural trappings. We have our ego identity, our cultural identity. I'm British, I'm Thomas, I'm this, that, and the other. So when I refract back, the teaching has a refractive index. The same with every other prophet who's ever lived, or teacher, or seer, or druid, or sage, or bodhisattva. And in my work, I I understand the nuances between them all, but fundamentally it's the same category, from the earliest shaman up to the latter-day druids, or, you know, the bishops of the church, or the the saints of the church, or the Sufis of Islam, who are the spiritual teachers of Islam. And I'm wearing a Sufi coat that was given to me by one of my Muslim students many years ago as a kind of badge of honour. Please have this, and it's from Afghanistan. I only bring it out on special occasions. It's my white Sufi robe that I'm using for Pentecost today, because it's a holy day, it's a special day. And it should be celebrated not just by Christians, you know, so-called, but also by all Muslims around the planet. And my work as a commentator is to build a bridge, a matrix, revealing the invisible, hidden connections, as David Bohm said. You know, there's an implicate order behind, he was talking about physical things. I say there's an implicate order behind spiritual revelations, and this thing should be studied behind, you know, the matrix where they all connect up, because there's links between Zoroastrianism, Manichaeanism, Islam, Christianity, Gnosticism, Kabbalah, Mahayana Buddhism, Vajrayana. You know, they're all in the implicate order of absolute wisdom and enlightenment. You know, it's one light. What's just appears to be different is because they manifest at different times of history, different places geographically, and in different languages, culturally and linguistically. But today, Pentecost, we celebrate the universality behind them all. So what does the Quran tell us about this? Surah 40, verse 64. It is God who has made for you the earth as a resting place, and the sky as a canopy, and has given you shape, and made your shapes beautiful, and has provided for you sustenance of things pure and good. Such is God, your Lord. So glory to God, the Lord of the worlds. Very short verse, verse number 64, Surah 40. It's affirming that it's behind the matrix of all possible revelations, right? is one ultimate implicate order, which is underwritten by a supreme intelligence, what I call the divine intelligence. I mean, I lived in the castle in Scotland. I set up a centre for the study of divine intelligence. You know, what is this unity of divine consciousness that underwrites everything? And how is it responsible for the night and the day? How is it responsible for... Verse 61 says, it is God who has made the night for you, that you may rest therein, and the day as that which helps you to see. Verily, God is full of grace and bounty to men, yet most men give no thanks. So, hang on, how can we say God created night and the day, or created the earth as a resting place, or the sky as a canopy? Surely this is all pre-scientific. We know that, you know, night and day are caused by the movement of the earth spinning on its axis, going around the sun. There's just a naturalistic explanation for this. Oh, but hang on, because, yes, but that's all due to gravity, and we don't know what gravity is or where it came from. I mean, if you read Isaac Newton's fantastic book, Principia Mathematica, he says at the very end, look, folks, I've told you the maths of gravity, I've showed you how it works mathematically, I haven't explained how it works,